Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all well. I'm just leaving it a minute for people just to come in. Just a shade after 10 o'clock. So we'll start soon. Numbers going up now. Let's give it a little bit longer just to get people in. Okay. Well, good morning. I'm Steve Morgan, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Tom Macbeth and Josephine Idem. And welcome to the penultimate webinar in our series of RECOUP webinars we've been taking place over the last few weeks. This one is about the release and the findings of the UK Household Plastics Collection Survey, the new report, and it's due being launched today. It's actually scheduled for an hour and a half, but I think it's probably going to run for about 30 to 45 minutes. So you get some time back to your day. Just a few words how the webinar runs. The chat function is switched off, but please do use the Q&A function, and we'll take questions at the end of the presentations. The webinar is being recorded, and the slides will be sent to you, and the recording will be sent to you later in the week. And of course, you can go to the RECOUP website to download the report. And there will be a press release which you'll see soon, maybe later this week or the beginning of next. Just next slide, please, Tom. Just a few words about RECOUP for those that might not be familiar with us. We were formed over 30 years ago, and we're a member-based independent charity. And it's mainly around to lead inform the development of plastic recycling and resource management. But we also get involved in other areas. We're very, very active around educating the public and businesses, reducing waste and protecting the natural environment as well. We actually have around about 180 members now, and they're across the different sectors. So polymer producers, plastic packaging manufacturers, local authorities, waste management providers, brands, retailers, recyclers, academia, and just about everyone in between. We see ourselves as the plastic value chain coordinators. So collaboration is absolutely essential to everything we do, and we rely completely on our membership base and our wider stakeholders to deliver our activities. Next slide, Tom, please. There are four main areas of our activity. So policy and infrastructure, which is the team that myself, Tom and Josie are in, packaging, recycling and design, sustainability and circularity, and communication and engagement. And within those areas, we actually engage with our members and our board to deliver a set of core activities each year. The activities are quite wide ranging. So they vary from our plastic recycling infrastructure reports, including the survey, which we're talking about today, to our recyclability by design guidance. We're involved in policy developments and consultation responses. We educate the public through our Pledge to Recycle Plastics initiative. And reuse is getting more and more important for us now as well. And there's actually going to be a new service to members around assessments of LCAs, life cycle analysis on plastic, which is coming soon. Next slide, please, Tom. So one of our main core activities, again, is around our plastic collection survey, which we're launching today. It's actually been running since 1995, so it's a long time. In the very first survey, there was 425 tons of plastic bottles collected for recycling from bring schemes. So over the years, this has obviously increased dramatically. And around about 2006-07, we were getting more and more data from curbside schemes. And over time, obviously, since more pots, tubs and trays were being collected, and survey provision is widened, it's actually taking us up now to just over 600,000 tons of plastic packaging collected for recycling in the UK. The actual report, as I said, is available now. So just go to our website, you can download it. And what we'll be doing, Tom and Josie will be going through the main findings of the report. And I'll be finishing off with some aspects around policy development at the end. So I'll pass you across now to my colleague, Tom, who will start taking you through some of the findings of the report. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, everyone. As you mentioned, I will just give a bit of an overview of the survey for this year, a bit of background as well, just to give it some context and some of the findings and figures as well. So firstly, like a bit of background for the survey and the report. So back in April this year, we began sending out a questionnaire to local authorities, county councils and waste partnerships to represent the 374 local authorities across the UK. Across all 4 of the devolved nations. And this was a questionnaire that had a mixture of questions around capturing the tonnage data, the material reject rates, anecdotal and qualitative information on positions of policy change and similar opinions in that respect. The response this year was very good, so it was at 76%, which is the best we've had since certainly post-COVID. So a big thank you to the local authorities and the members of staff who gave their time to complete the survey this year. To complement this, as we do every year, the RECOUP team conducted a search of local authority websites to understand the provision that's available for curbside recycling, as well as the communications as well. So that's to understand the number of local authorities that accept plastic bottles for recycling, pots, tubs and trays, films and flexibles, and a few other bespoke items as well, such as cartons, coffee pods and plant pots. The communications around this as well, as mentioned, so the language that was used to describe certain items in different formats, as well as the instructions for how to dispose of those items, so whether bottles should have the tops put back on or removed, whether packaging should be cleaned, squashed, and similar guidance like that. The gaps in the data that we did have from the survey have been filled in with a combination of information from previous years and previous survey responses, as well as compositional analysis and understanding given to us by waste management companies as well. We've also combined this with the updated census data for 2021. So this gave us new household figures for England and Wales, and this helped us to estimate the amount of packaging that was used per household across the UK. It's worth noting there has been a decrease of local authorities year on year. So we're down to 374 as the graphic on the right shows. And this is due to a few local authorities in England merging with one another to set up waste partnerships. This does have a slight knock-on effect for the percentages because the data was for the previous year, for 2021, but it is very minor and has been accounted for in the household data as well. In order to measure the performance of local authorities, we've used Valpak's information on placed on the market figures for plastic packaging. This stems from the PackFlow 2025 report and also the COVID impact reports that were released a couple of years ago. And we have applied some industry knowledge and data to those figures to reflect the changes in the material stream for 2021. These are the placed on the market figures, just for some context. So these, as I say, these revised from the COVID impact report from Valpak, and has begun to turn back to more what we expect to be normal, or what is normal now compared to the significant changes that happened during the COVID pandemic or the early days of the COVID pandemic. These figures historically have also included a other rigid plastic packaging fraction, which constitutes a number of items that make up rigid plastics that are in the waste stream that are not necessarily plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays. There is a better understanding of this year, breakdown of things such as bottle lids, which have been able to go in the bottle fraction, and also residual films that may be with pots, tubs and trays. And that has been sort of disseminated better between the other fractions, but there's more work to be done in this space. In fact, the whole placed on the market data section, it isn't exact science in the sense that there is work being done in this space, and with the upcoming EPR requirements for reporting packaging placed on the market and what's actually out there, RECOUP will continue to review these figures each year. So just to get into some of the actual findings and figures, the trends for the survey this year are not dissimilar to previous years. So in terms of provision, this is the number of local authorities, or the percentage of local authorities who offer a service at curbside for recycling. So since 2020, all local authorities in the UK have offered a curbside recycling service that accepts plastic bottles, and this remains the same for this year. Pots, tubs and trays has increased slightly to 88%, so that's only a 1% increase on 2020. And plastic films and flexibles has decreased slightly to still 13%, but it is a few local authorities less than it was last year. We also collated some information on the curbside provision for specific items, so drinks cartons, plastic plant pots, coffee capsules and others. These all show a significant variation in the what is accepted for recycling from one local authority to another. In terms of trends, the as mentioned, pots, tubs and trays increased year on year, and this is the 12th year in a row, as you can see in the chart on the right. But films and flexibles has been going the other way for a number of years and has declined again for the 6th year in a row. But I should add that this doesn't include non-local authority provision for collection. So the increase of retailer front of stores for plastic films and flexibles may compensate for, or inevitably compensates for some of that material that that would otherwise potentially be collected at curbside. It is possible to expect that the growth, as you can see on the right, pots, tubs and trays in particular grew significantly going back a decade. This growth has slowed off a bit in recent years. This may be because of the established services that are in place, but also some stagnation because of local authorities needing to wait on the implementation of certain policy changes. Maybe a hesitance to invest in changes of service until things like consistent collections and EPR have been fully clarified to give the confidence for local authorities that they know what they need and what they're expected to collect for recycling at curbside. So over recent years, we've seen more attempts by local authorities not only to increase the quantity of material, but the quality. And this has been done in a number of ways. The figures have moved towards a source separated style of collection. So this is where one or more materials is collected separately from the others at curbside, as opposed to dry mix recycling, where it is all commingled into one bin or one container. And for this year, we're seeing that's 54% of local authorities using some form of source separate collection, which is up from 50% last year. We have had some anecdotal comments in the survey that some councils have moved the other way, particularly around the impacts and the cost of operating a separate collection for a single type of material. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses, particularly with the challenges to public service finances that are likely to come up, well, if they haven't already come up, but are likely to come up next year. As with the last few years, we looked at the container types and frequency. So most local authorities use wheel bins in the UK, but there is still quite a variation. 75% use wheel bins, but there is also a mixture of caddies and bags as well. And even the inconsistency within the bin colours as well, as you can see in the graph in the bottom left. Most use blue, but it's a good example of how varying local authorities are from one area to another. And on the far right as well, you can see the collection frequency, which is consistent with previous years. Most recycling is collected on a fortnightly basis, but this does vary from area to area, often dependent on things like population densities. So, for example, there are some councils that collect more than once per week. This is much more likely to be a heavily heavily dense area of population where that can be justified rather than to do with collection performance necessarily. So combining the tonnage data that we've collected from local authorities for the survey with the place in the market data from Valpac, we're able to get an idea of the collection rate for each fraction, as well as looking at the volumes in total. So in total, 606,000 tonnes of plastic packaging, post-consumer plastic packaging was collected through these streams. That's a combination of curbside and also non-curbside, so things like HWRCs and local authority operated bring schemes. And this is a collection rate of 42%, which is both of those a slight increase on previous years. This is primarily down to an increase in collection of bottles, the collection rate for which has gone up slightly in line with the increase in the amount placed on the market as well. and also pots, tubs and trays, which have increased as well. So the figures there you can see on the right, 407,000 tons of plastic bottles, 63% collected. That is broken down into drinks and non-drinks. So similar to last year, 78% of HDPE drinks bottles. So, for example, milk bottles have been collected, 75% of PET drinks bottles collected, and a much lower rate, 45% for non-drinks bottles. So things like bleach bottles, which obviously have a more challenging sort of recycling route and a lower value. Pots, tubs and trays, as I say, has increased slightly to 174,000 tons and 38% collection rates, whilst plastic films and flexibles has increased slightly, although it is less than 1,000 tons, it still shows as 25,000 tons. Because of the change of the placed on the market figures, films and flexibles, this is a drop in the collection rate, down from 8% to 7%. But as I mentioned before, this does not account for material that's collected through retailer front of store schemes, which is likely to increase that volume quite considerably in the scheme of how much is collected. On the right, we can see just how much potential there is for increasing the collection of this material. So the blue bars are how much is placed on the market, and the green bars within them is how much is actually collected from households. So even things like bottles, there's still significant potential there to increase the capture rate for this source of material. And particularly with plastic films and flexibles, there's a huge way to go, and hopefully we're seeing that the policy changes that are due to come in will help to capture this material. A quick overview of the breakdown by the devolved nations. So you can see on the left the provision rates and the collection rates for each area. These are very similar to previous years in terms of their proportions, with Wales being superior to the other devolved nations. It is worth noting this is based on updated census data as well. So Scotland's household figures have not been updated yet. And also the proportionate splits for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are much higher than England, purely down to the lower population and collection tonnages in general. These aren't an exact science, not exact figures, but they do give an idea of the range across the 4 devolved nations. So a quick graph to show the progression of recycling over the past decades. So this compares the declared recycling figures from the EA. So just to clarify, this is all plastic packaging, including commercial and industrial, not just post-consumer. And the placed on the market figures are from the survey updated Valpak impact COVID impact report figures for plastic packaging placed on the market for commercial and consumer. So a few important, one figure stands out in particular, which is 2020, which would be no surprise, is largely due to the impact of COVID, whereby the amount of material believed to be placed on the market dropped. But we're seeing a return to that sort of that gradual increase in the recycling rate, and a recycling rate of 50% for 2021. A graph here showing how collection volumes have changed, annual collection volumes have changed year on year since 2003, when curbside recycling was brought in on a wide scale, and 2007, where data for pots, tubs and trays was brought in as well. So we can see, albeit slowing down slightly over recent years, given all the challenges, there is still that increase in the amount of material that's being collected, which is extremely positive. And Steve will touch on policy later, but hopefully that will continue to drive this growth, and hopefully we'll see a spike in the next few years to an increase in the amount that's actually collected at curbside. In October this year, RECOUP released its updated infrastructure report for the UK. So this was looking at the sorting and reprocessing infrastructure for plastic packaging, household and commercial and industrial. Some key figures on the screen there. The number of material recovery facilities in the UK was 123. Plastic reprocessors, much lower for household, around about 16, and a annual capacity up to 455,000 tons. So what we found from the infrastructure report in particular was there was a lack of infrastructure to reprocess food contact material, films and flexibles, non-bottle PET, and pots, tubs and trays. The report is available to members on the website. To tie that into the survey, we did ask local authorities what their treatment of residual waste was, and the majority, 75%, are using energy recovery to treat it, and only 24% of local authorities are actively recovering plastic packaging from the residual waste stream prior to it going to an energy recovery landfill or another non-circular destination. So there is a lot of potential there for the capture of more material, as mentioned on the previous slides. But also there is a need for that investment in infrastructure to ensure that the recycler, once it is captured, is actually recyclable within the UK. I'm going to go on to a few points about export as well. The UK is still largely reliant on export to meet its recycling rates. I should note these figures are for England only, and again they do include both commercial and household figures. Turkey has remained the main destination for plastic recycling exported from the UK, or from England, sorry, although this is an amount that's dropped year on year. And also there has been a drop in the use of non-OECD or developing countries as well. So proportionately more material has been going to EU member states than in previous years. And in fact, the amount of material actually being exported from England has dropped quite considerably in the last few years. So pre-COVID, around the time the Asian market stopped accepting material on such a wide scale, we were seeing export rates of around 65% for plastic packaging. For 2021, this is 47%, and for 2022 so far, it's down to 45%. So it does seem to be a trend that we're heading in that general direction. But this could be for a number of reasons. It could be due to the policy changes. It could be due to the COVID lockdowns. Increased costs is obviously a big one at the moment, or just the general perception that we should be treating more waste domestically. But either way, it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this and see how, as things develop and as how global circumstances change in respect of waste management policy and the perception of the public and of the industry, whether this is a trend that continues. I'll hand over to my colleague Josie, who just cover off some of the communications points.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Steve. Hello, everybody. My name's Josephine, and good morning. I'm here to talk to you about citizens communication. But before I do that, I'm going to go into Pledge to Recycle. Well, what is Pledge to Recycle? It is a program that's run by RECOUP, and it's our ground charity contribution. So we work directly with local authority communications, social media, schools, and person-to-person contact, trying to give information about what can and cannot be recycled, and also why certain things are recycled and certain recycling processes to understand what happens to your bottle when it goes inside of the recycling bin. We have free educational downloads for local authorities, councils, schools, and for individuals to use, and those are all available on the RECOUP website. Next slide, please, Tom. I'm also going to mention a little bit about Kent, which is a project that RECOUP is partnering with our Pledge to Recycle brand, which I just mentioned earlier. The Kent project is also funded by SSPP, and it's partnered with UKRI. It works with 1.5 million people in 678,000 households, delivering consistent communication and measuring the outcome of that consistent communication to see how it impacts recycling. We also have a deep dive on our Kent project that is available on our website called Kent Understanding Plastics Live Lab, if you would like to go into more information about what this project has had outcomes in. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay, so now we've gotten to our main point here about citizens communication. So just as a little bit of background for those of you who might be new to the recycling industry, or if you may have forgotten, each local authority works with a different MRF, either our material recycling facility. Either they contract their own, or they have their own contract with an existing recycling facility. What this means is that every single MRF that a council might partner with will recycle things slightly differently. This creates inconsistencies in what certain items councils can and cannot recycle. So if we look here on our left, an example of that is that 36% of councils advise to leave lids on bottles when putting them in the recycling bin. 12% do not. 51% of local authorities advise to flatten or squash materials before placing it in the recycling bin. 49% do not. 84% advise to empty, rinse, and wash material before it goes in the recycling bin. 16% do not. And further, 9% of local authorities refer to polymer codes, which are the little labels on the bottom of packaging that say PS or PP in respect of recyclability. So for example, instead of saying do not recycle styrofoam, they might say do not recycle something with a label of PS. This requires the citizen to not only understand what these polymer codes are, but also know where to find them and how to distinguish between them. Because of that, in our survey report, RECOUP recommends not using polymer codes as a primary source of distinguishing recyclability for local authorities. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, some of these inconsistencies are due simply to the recycling practices or the material recycling facility that councils use, since they do vary. But some of the things that we have found in our survey also relate to things that could be changed. For example, inconsistency in language. So one council might say, we do not recycle Tetra Pak, and they call Tetra Pak, while another local authority may say, we don't recycle juice cartons or milk cartons. And this inconsistency in language can be a bit confusing for different citizens. Also, local authority websites tend to use multiple pages to go through on their websites to find recycling information. So if a citizen first is engaged in understanding what they can and cannot recycle in their local authority, and they've gone to the website to find information, they're often prompted to go through multiple windows and click on multiple links inside the website to be able to find the information that they need. For example, it took me between 10 to 15 minutes to find the information that I needed per council for the survey, and I knew what I was looking for. So as you can imagine, for a citizen, it might be quite difficult to find the information that they need on the websites. Now, obviously, there are attempts by local authorities, and we are moving in the right direction to try to engage in communications in an impactful way. In fact, 68% of local authorities ran communication campaigns within the last 12 months. And 35% of these 68% communication campaigns were focusing on reducing the contamination that was inside the recycling box. And again, further, 65% of local authorities are planning communication campaigns this year. So we are trying to engage with citizens to help them increase the recycling rate and to reduce the amount of contamination that they find inside of their recycling bin. Next slide, please, Tom. So moving on to waste crime. So just as an overview, what we found in our survey is that fly tipping accounts for about 60 million pounds annually, and cleaning up litter costs for about 500 million pounds annually for local authorities. Now, I should mention that fly tipping did slightly decrease between the 2020 and 2021, but of course that could be linked to COVID. So litter, and of course this cost isn't getting any cheaper. Litter and fly tipping, we found in our survey report, has been increasing in the last 12 months. And there's different variables in what causes litter, and they're often difficult to measure because there's not a large spread database on what causes litter and the behavioral impacts of them. Of course, part of it is behavioral, but some of it can also be linked to individual local authorities. For example, the density of the population in a local authority, or the geography of how the area is built. But of course, RECOUP is currently working with River Neen to try to understand some of the aspects of what causes litter in different local authorities. Now, what are councils doing about this litter? Well, they're working to do some understanding of what causes it by creating litter pickings that go along inside their area. And 85% of local authorities conduct litter picks, and 70% of local authorities enforce fines or penalties, and 55% conduct communication and education to reducing litter. Now, of course, the issue with the litter picks is it's difficult to pick out what is littered in regards to packaging, because different litter pickers might pick up different things. What this means is, of course, we're all thinking about EPR in the future, and those numbers that I mentioned at the very beginning, the 60 million and the 500 million, will soon be moved from the taxpayer and partially paid by the producers of the packaging. And with the insufficient amount of data that we have at the moment, it's difficult to say just how much of this cost of littering is going to be moved on to the producer, but we'll have to wait and see what happens in the future. Thank you. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Josie. Yep, just got a few final slides, a bit of context to the plastics market in general this year, or last year as well, sorry. So PRNs, packaging recovery notes, they are the current producer responsibility system in the UK. So they're purchased as an obligation, and the money is reinvested into the recovery and recycling of packaging waste. So whilst these aren't directly linked to local authorities or the material that's collected, they do give an indication and context to the value of the plastics recycling market and the value of plastics and recycling in general, as well as the UK's progress towards its targets and sort of they give a general idea of the stability of the market. So you can see in the graph on the left, average PRN prices per ton. Significant volatility, I think is probably the best word, in 2019 and 2020. This was a result initially of the changes to the Asian markets and other markets, but also COVID-19, the challenges with recycling, exporting material, etc. This has stabilized somewhat for 2021, so it's back down to around about £81 per ton on average throughout the year, but the highs and lows are a lot less extreme than they were in previous years. That said, for 2022, particularly November 2022, we've seen some more volatility in this area. So just thought this was worth mentioning and sharing as part of this presentation, particularly as we now know, or we've known this year, that with the introduction of EPR, this PRN system is due to continue for the time being. Following a consultation on reforming it, though the money raised through EPR will fund local authority collections and collections and recycling infrastructure in the UK. So again, just to give some context, the PRN, the money raised from PRNs in the past or presently has invested in things such as infrastructure and capacity, funding collection, reducing price in developing markets, compliance with regulation, and developing communication strategies. And we can see there's significant amounts of money that have been put into that over the years, but EPR is expected to be considerably more in terms of the amount of money that will be raised in this area. And finally, from me, just a few figures to give an idea of the value of the material that's out there, to show that there is some justification in terms of the collection. There is more potential in terms of the collection beyond policy change. So just to caveat that these figures are, incredibly vague. It's not possible to put a realistic value on the material stream because of the variables in terms of the value at any given time, the quality of the material, the volumes, the composition, etc. But it does give an idea of just what we're looking at in terms of what's collected and what's actually out there. So looking at rigid plastics, bottles and pot stubs and trays that were collected in 2021, £124 million worth based on average prices for the year. But if there was a 100% collection rate, that would be much higher, around about £61 million higher. So there is a considerable amount of money out there in terms of material value, assuming that the quality is right and that the infrastructure is there to be able to process it. I'm going to hand back to Steve, who's just going to give an overview of policy and regulation. Thank you, Steve. You're on mute, Steve.
Thanks. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Josie. Yeah, so just going to finish off just by taking through some of the policy and regulation areas that are obviously affecting waste and recycling, and particularly for plastics over the next few years. So the first one is around obviously extended producer responsibility. So that includes things like recycling targets, digital waste tracking, end of waste status, and there's a whole range of areas that are being raised through that, such as the universal collection of plastic films and flexibles from households and businesses as well by 2027. So there's an awful lot in there. Obviously, consistency in household and business recycling is taking place. The process is going through to take place at the moment, and a deposit return scheme for England, Wales and Northern Ireland is in the making, I would say. But we know, and we've communicated that the system in Scotland will be going live from August 2023. There's also a range of changes that are going to be happening regarding waste shipments to export material for recycling, and also around recycled plastic and food contact packaging as well. And there's a couple of useful bits of information that have come out in the recent weeks. One is around a revised packaging and packaging waste directive proposal from the EU. Now, we're obviously outside the EU, but because there's international markets, we're very much looking, the UK is very much looking at what happens around that. And in that packaging waste directive proposal, there's some quite stringent targets around recycling, waste reduction and reuse. So it actually points to quite a cultural change that's going to need to be happening over the next few years to achieve those targets. Also, there's been in November, a House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee report called The Price of Plastic, Ending the Toll on Plastic Waste. And that included some quite interesting recommendations. One was around banning the export of plastic waste by the end of 2027, which obviously has huge implications, or would have. Reinvesting the income raised from the plastic packaging tax into recycling infrastructure and promising areas of future research. That would be logical, but actually at the moment, the money from the plastic packaging tax to include recycled content in your packaging goes back to Central Treasury. And it's also about setting up the investment ready conditions as well. And this is advising the government to do that, to unlock a lot of private investment. And they talk about figures in there up to about £10 million that could come into the waste and recycling infrastructure to do just that. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening at the moment. And finally, on this slide, we've actually put it into the RECOUP survey report. That's the current situation regarding single-use plastics across the devolved nations and their approaches to them regarding different materials. So it's quite an interesting little read in summary, which you'll be able to obviously view when you download the report. Next slide, please, Tom. In the survey, we actually asked local authorities their views on some of the policy changes. So single-use plastic bans, consistency in recycling collections in England, deposit return schemes and extended producer responsibility. And there was actually quite a reasonable agreement with most of the policies that are coming in. Very hard to see from this graph actually in terms of the colours on the slide. But the figures on the right, so the light greens and the blues show general support or strong support. The dark green to the left is kind of neutral, and the black and the red actually they're saying they're not supportive at all. So general support for single-use plastic bans and restrictions, consistency, extended producer responsibility, but actually there's a lot more unsurety and a mixed views around deposit return schemes, obviously with the valuable drinks containers coming out of the material stream. Overall, there's what we can see, there's quite a bottleneck in terms of progress for policy. But there's actually been a bit of flurry of activity recently on extended producer responsibility. So no news was happening for quite some time. There's a lot of frustration about, can local authorities invest, waste management companies invest in the future, what the policy actually states, things like films and flexibles, digital waste tracking, contracts and things like that. And what we've actually found was on the 22nd of November, there was a statutory instrument for England laid in Parliament, which actually sets the scene for starting the reporting of producer data into the EPR scheme. So producer data is actually reporting what producers of plastic packaging or packaging get placed onto the market each year. And that starts in January. That data is then going to be used to define what producer fees are paid. So once you've got that mechanism started, collecting the data, reporting the data, then you can actually start to see some of the actual tangible changes that are going to be happening to fund the future of waste and recycling in the UK. In addition to this, building on obviously what we've seen before, And what I've mentioned before, data collection for EPR starts in January, but also the DRS in Scotland starts in 2023. Now, behind all this, there's an awful lot going on. So the impact of the cost of living and energy crisis is obviously having huge implications for local authorities, waste management providers, and a lot for recyclers as well. So when you've got that pinch points coming in under existing contracts, making those kind of hard to recycle materials is going to be a real big challenge. So I'm particularly looking at films and flexibles. RECOUP are involved in quite a large project at the moment called Flex Collect around that. So it's the largest, most extensive pilot to trial of the collection and recycling of plastic films and flexibles in the UK. And what we're finding is when we're talking to local authorities, it's difficult they don't have the reassurance in the policy. It's definitely going to happen by 2027, although it might likely be that way. The actual recyclers are really struggling at the moment. So at the very minute, there's a lot of developments happening regarding technology, a lot of exciting stuff, but the recyclers are actually operating in a very, very tight commercial regime at the minute. Markets have dropped, energy prices are going up, so it's quite a hard balancing act to be dealing with. Also, we found from the survey that in the last year, 24% of local authorities have reported that they've received budget cuts to deliver waste and recycling activities in their local authority. 24%. This seems to be kind of an ongoing trend. So I'd be really interested to see how this plays out in the next 2 or 3 years when EPR fees start to come through. Next slide, please, Tom. So that's given an overview basically of what the information which we found. There's more information in the actual report, so please do go down onto our website to download the report. And what we'll be doing each year as RECOUP, we'll be continuing to use this report. It goes into a lot of policy discussions. It goes to DEFRA, HMRC regarding the plastic packaging tax. We use it in wider discussions with other countries as well about how the UK is performing. So it's something we'll continue to do to provide the evidence that's needed to hopefully set in place good policy for the future. So I think that's in terms of the presentation, that's it from myself, Josie and Tom. We do have some questions coming up, which we'll take now. Josie and Tom, if you're able to put your videos back on. There's one here I think it's probably best placed to Tom. It says in terms of the figures showing collected plastic material going to the plastic market, it's said to be 70% going to the EU. Do you have data on what happens to this material after it goes to the EU? Is it processed there, or is it sent to other countries, especially developing countries? That's the question to come in.
Yeah, the data in the survey and the data we use for the exports come from the Environment Agency. So their way of reporting is sort of the first, let's say the first point of call, just kind of assume it would go somewhere else, but it is the destination that it's being received at. So in terms of verification where it's going, the Environment Agency have an auditing system for where the material is going, and it should be verified that way. But no, in terms of that question specifically, the 70% is what is going to the EU at the first point of call.
Yeah, I think within the EPR regulations, when they come in, reporting and auditing of the final end destination for that material should be happening. How that's enforced is another matter, but that's one of the policy changes that's going to be really interesting to track and make sure is done correctly. Thanks, Tom. Josie, there's a comment around. So obviously somebody's noticed your accent, and they've got a question around the how deposit return schemes work. And is there anything we can learn from the United States around use of deposit return schemes in the UK? Obviously, there's big changes going to be happening over the next few years. Possible use of a digital scheme as well, so you can recycle those items at home and place them in your curbside bins. But is there anything we can maybe learn from how DRS has been used in the United States?
I think there's actually quite a bit, and I'm surprised that I haven't seen more research about the US, because I know there's been quite a lot of research done within the UK because it's a similar market. But in the United States, when I was younger, my father used to go and we would return all of our plastic bottles all of the time. But the price for returning a plastic bottle, the money that you get back, has stayed the same since I was 3 years old. It's been the same 5 cents that you get back. And at some point, my family decided it wasn't worth the trip of loading up the car, going to the grocery store and putting in all of the plastic bottles into the machines. Because not as many people were using the machines, they fell into disrepair. And then now the plastic bottles are usually collected by the homeless to try to get some extra money. So I think one of the main things is, if you're going to put a price on bottles that get returned or whatever's getting returned by DRS, make sure that it's in line with inflation and that it keeps up. Because if the value of whatever it is that you're returning is not deemed worth the price in gas of going to get it returned, or the hassle of having to carry it to wherever the machines are, then people aren't going to do it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the dynamic between the different UK nations is going to be quite interesting to track. Obviously, Scotland are going first in August 2023. That's the plan. And that dynamic between how we collect drinks, beverages, containers at home, potentially through a digital scheme, how we collect away from home, maybe for the use of reverse vending machines, and even use of, obviously, for traditional schemes for retailers is going to be it's quite interesting. Thanks, Josie. There's a question here around UK recycling processing data for plastic films and flexibles. So in the Flex Collect project, RECOUP has 2 roles. One of them is to do material composition analysis on the collected material to understand what's in it. And that then feeds into also the feedstock requirements and direction of the processes that the end markets would then take as well. So if there's more, for example, polyethylene in the mix, clear polyethylene, that gives better values, and it gives a good indication as to there could be a good result from the collected material in terms of an audited end market. If there's more, maybe there's contamination, color material, PVC or PET, that takes in a slightly different direction. But the other role we've taken on in the project is to research potential end markets. So within the project, we've produced a report. It's 90 pages long, and it's a lot of information about facilities that are reprocessing the material at the moment, but also could do for the future. But if I was to give an assessment as to where we are now regarding recycling household films and flexibles, not the commercial material, or household, we're probably talking less than 1 out of 10. But I've seen so much going on in the last few months. I've spoken to so many different organizations and developing technologies, and there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. So I think we could very much get that 1 out of 10 up to 5 or 6 within 2 or 3 years' time. I think the biggest challenge is going to be, in the first instance, sorting materials. So when we actually collect it, we've got obviously quite an eclectic set of colors, polymers, formats, and it's that first point of sorting into the different various material streams is going to be really, really vital to dictate where that material actually goes. So yeah, I'm trying not to be too negative at the moment because there's a lot of good stuff happening, but I think we've got to try and be optimistic by 2027 with what's happening at the moment. We can get to a good point where a good amount of that material can be reprocessed within the UK. The last question regarding the plastic packaging tax. So maybe one for Tom to take. Are we seeing any behavioral changes from packaging manufacturers, brands, retailers in terms of what's placed in the market and how they use recycled content? Obviously, the tax went live in April, but what's changed since then? Is there any tangible changes we can actually assess?
I think we're still, in terms of the whole plastic chain, I suppose we're still waiting on EPR and the outcomes of EPR to really understand how things are going to settle. The plastic packaging tax, yeah, like you say, it came in April. We've seen some coverage that it hasn't had the take up that was expected, or the number of companies to have registered for the packaging tax as was expected, for one reason or another. So it just still seems to be bedding in. So I think come sort of April time, the end of the first financial year, it will be interesting to see what HMRC's approach is to the packaging tax. In terms of the place on the market figures we've seen for the last year, it's quite proportionately increasing. It's quite hard to tell what's changing because of what at the moment, because of the impact of COVID, the impact of cost of living, the impact of changes in material demands. There's a lot of variables that are going on in a lot of different sectors, and trying to pin the reasoning behind any individual change is quite difficult. But in terms of the place on the market data, it has seemed quite consistent year on year. And the same for 2021, and I'd anticipate the same for 2022 as well, until there's some more clarity around the other policy changes that are due to come in.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say in terms of the markets for plastic packaging, I think it's definitely undergoing a period of correction, price correction. So prices have dropped where they were. It might get to a point where actually the £200 needs to increase to increase the incentivization to include recycled content, but equally so as well. I think the main point of advocacy for a lot in the industry is to get that funding that's raised through the tax back into the development of the waste and recycling infrastructure, and not going back to central treasury. So thanks, Tom. I think that's about it. I think in terms of the questions we received so far, I have seen a couple privately as well. So I think if you've got any other questions regarding the content today, please do contact myself, Tom, or Josie. Remember, the slides will be shared with you and the recording later in the week, and you can download the report obviously from the RECOUP website. So on behalf of Tom, Josie, and myself, have a good rest of your day. Take care, and goodbye for now. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.